The moment my husband's eyes locked onto mine from across the crowded dining room, I watched the color drain from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He was standing on the small elevated host platform near the bar, surrounded by local food critics, real estate developers, and the kind of social media personalities who get paid to show up and smile. He had a glass of Barolo raised above his head mid-toast, his custom midnight blue suit catching the warm amber glow of the pendant lights we had spent 3 weeks arguing over together. The restaurant looked beautiful, every last detail of it, the reclaimed oak panels, the hand-painted ceiling murals, the imported stone bar top had been discussed, approved, and paid for in large part with my inheritance money. I had not been invited to the opening. I found out about it the same way the rest of the city did. Through an Instagram post. He had tagged the location, credited the interior designer, thanked his family, and celebrated his new beginning without a single mention of the woman who had written the checks that made all of it possible. I sat in my apartment with my phone in my hand, staring at his smiling face in the photo, and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not the quiet of defeat, the quiet of absolute certainty. I had been planning for this moment for 6 weeks, ever since my attorney confirmed what I had long suspected. I had simply been waiting for tonight. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter, poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, and made 2 phone calls. Now I was standing in the entrance of his grand opening, flanked by a process server and 2 attorneys from my firm, and the entire room had gone silent. He stepped down from the platform so quickly he nearly stumbled, his smile evaporating and something wild and cornered replacing it. He crossed the dining room toward me with the kind of forced authority that people use when they are terrified but cannot afford to look at. The woman he had left me for was sitting at the chef's table near the kitchen pass. I recognized her immediately from the photos my attorney had gathered. She was younger than I expected, dressed in an ivory slip dress that had clearly been selected for the occasion. She half stood when she saw me, gripping the edge of the tablecloth. "What are you doing here?" my husband demanded, dropping his voice low and controlled. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing the rapid calculation that narcissists always do. When the room is watching, how do I spin this? How do I stay the victim? "I am here on a matter of contract," I said. I turned slightly and gave a small nod to the process server beside me. He stepped forward, reached into the envelope he was carrying, and placed a thick stapled document directly into my husband's hand. My husband looked down at the papers without touching them at first. The way you look at something you already know is going to hurt you. Then he picked them up. I watched his eyes move across the first page. I watched his expression shift from controlled anger to genuine confusion to the first real tremor of fear. "What is this?" he said. His voice had lost its edge. "That is a formal notice of breach of the operating agreement for Meridian Hospitality LLC, I said, keeping my voice completely level. "You are looking at a filing that documents 17 specific violations, including the unauthorized disbursement of $480,000 from the company's capital reserve account, the removal of a managing member without a supermajority vote, and the failure to disclose material financial arrangements to all listed partners." He stared at me, his mouth opened and closed once. "You are not a partner," he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. I pulled out my own copy of the operating agreement from my bag. I turned to the signature page and held it up so he could see it clearly. The notary stamp, his initials on every page, my name on the first line under managing members. 31% interest, I said. Documented, filed, and entirely legal. Your attorney drafted this agreement, and your attorney apparently did not tell you that the clause you signed about capital contributions grants the contributing member automatic managing status upon investment thresholds above $250,000. I crossed that threshold twice. The room had gone completely still. The food critics had stopped eating. The social media personalities had not yet raised their phones, but I could see the calculation happening behind several pairs of eyes. My husband took a step toward me. His voice dropped into something mean and tight. "You are embarrassing yourself," he said. "You are embarrassing me. This is a private event and you are not on the guest list because our marriage is over and I have moved on. Whatever legal stunt this is, it ends tonight. I will call security." He turned and made a short gesture toward the front of the room. Two men in black blazers moved from the entrance wall. They stopped the moment they saw that my attorneys had already spread out a second set of documents on the host stand and were speaking quietly into phones. One of my attorneys looked up and shook her head at the security personnel with the calm authority of someone who has done this exact thing in restaurants and hotel lobbies and corporate boardrooms for 15 years. The security guards looked at each other, then looked at my husband, and did not move any further. I continued as if none of that had happened. Because you are in breach of the operating agreement, I said, I am exercising the managing member's right of first remedy under Section 9, Paragraph C. I am suspending your operational authority over Meridian Hospitality LLC effective at midnight tonight. That means the company cards are frozen as of tomorrow morning. The business checking account requires dual authorization for any transaction above $500, and the exclusive liquor license, which is registered under the LLC and not under your personal name, cannot be used to operate this establishment without my co-signature. I paused and let that land. You cannot serve alcohol in this restaurant without my signature, I said simply. Someone at the bar made a short, involuntary sound. A woman near the kitchen put down her wine glass very carefully. My husband's face had gone from pale to a mottled, splotchy red. He looked like a man whose architecture was collapsing around him in real time, but who had not yet decided to run. He straightened his jacket. He looked around the room. He settled on the performance. Everyone, he announced, raising his voice with the kind of practiced warmth that I once found charming. I am so sorry for this interruption. My estranged wife is going through an incredibly difficult time right now. This is a personal matter that has absolutely no impact on tonight or on the future of this restaurant. I want you all to enjoy your meals. Please, the kitchen is ready. She is the reason you have a restaurant to open, said a voice from the back of the room. I turned. I was not expecting that. A man I did not recognize, older, silver-haired, wearing a well-cut blazer, was standing near the window. He looked at my husband with an expression of quiet disgust. He set his water glass down. I am Marcus Webb, he said to the room. I write for New York Eats. I have been covering restaurant openings in this city for 22 years, and I received the background briefing documents that this woman's legal team sent to press contacts this afternoon, so I know exactly who funded this project, and I know exactly what this operating agreement says. He looked at my husband. You should have been more careful about who you sent the press invitations to. My husband turned back to me. The performance was gone. What was underneath it was uglier and smaller. You sent documents to the press, he said through his teeth. I sent the documents to the parties entitled to receive them, I said. That includes your investors. Speaking of which, I glanced toward the far side of the room where three men in expensive, understated clothing were already rising from their table. Your Series A partners were also on that distribution list this afternoon. The lead investor, a man with the quiet, unhurried energy of someone who had lost money before and did not intend to do so again, walked over. He did not speak to my husband. He addressed me directly. We would like to schedule a formal review of the company financials before we proceed with the next capital tranche, he said. His tone was courteous and completely immovable. This is not a negotiation. It is a condition. He nodded once at me and walked toward the exit. The other two investors followed him without a word. My husband watched his funding walk out the front door of the restaurant he had spent 8 months building. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. The pendant lights were still warm and golden above him. The ceiling murals were still beautiful. The bar was still stocked. Everything he had wanted looked exactly right, and none of it belonged to him in the way he thought it did. He turned to me, and for a single moment I saw the real thing underneath all the arrogance and the cruelty. He was afraid, not of me exactly, of the specific kind of reckoning that comes when you have spent years treating someone like a resource, and you finally discover they have been quietly reading the terms the entire time. You cannot do this to me, he said. His voice was unsteady. We can work this out. You do not have to blow this up. You blew it up, I said. The night you transferred $60,000 out of the company account to lease an apartment for someone who was not your wife. The The night you forged an amendment to the operating agreement and filed it with a notary you paid personally to alter the ownership percentages. You blew it up. I am simply making sure the debris lands where it belongs." His mother appeared from somewhere near the private dining room. I had not seen her earlier, but she had clearly been there for the whole evening. She was in a burgundy blazer and pearl earrings, and the expression she always wore around me, the polished version of contempt that wealthy women who married well have perfected into an art form. She had never made a secret of what she thought of me. I was the girl her son had married young, before he became successful, before he became the person she always knew he would be. I was a phase he had not yet outgrown. "This is humiliating," she said to me, not bothering to lower her voice. "Whatever dispute you have with my son should be handled privately, not weaponized into a public spectacle." I looked at her calmly. "I have a question for you," I said. "Did your son tell you that he used the LLC to co-sign the lease on that apartment?" She blinked. "The lease on the apartment where he has been living for the last 4 months," I continued. "The one he signed using the company's credit standing. Because the LLC is also listed as a guarantor on that residential lease, which means the company and therefore its managing members bears liability if that lease defaults. I have already notified the leasing office that I am disputing the LLC's authorization on that agreement, which means the lease itself may be invalid." Her expression changed. The polished contempt flickered, and something much more personal moved underneath it. "He used the company," she said slowly. She was not talking to me. She was processing something. "He used the company to guarantee the apartment," I confirmed. "I am not sure if he told you that when he asked you to co-sign the renovation loan." "The renovation loan," she repeated. Her voice had gone flat. "The $240,000 renovation loan that was secured partly on your personal credit," I said. "The one his attorney filed 3 months ago. I have a copy if you would like to see it." She looked at her son. Her face had changed entirely. My husband held up both hands. "Mom, this is not the place. You put my name on a loan," she said. Her voice was controlled in the way that a controlled substance is controlled barely, and only technically. "It was temporary," he said. "I was going to refinance out of it once the investors—" "You put my house on a guarantee for a restaurant that your wife apparently still half owns," she said, and something in her voice cracked right down the center. Gavin had done this. Her golden son had been spending other people's money, other people's credit, other people's futures, and calling it ambition. I could see the precise moment she understood it. She did not cry. She was not that kind of woman. She picked up her bag from the nearest chair, looked at her son for a long and damning moment, and walked out of the restaurant without another word. My husband watched her leave. He was standing in the center of his beautiful, ruined opening. Investors gone, press compromised, mother departed, and I was still there, still standing in the entrance in my gray coat, with my attorneys on either side of me and the operating agreement in my hand. He turned back to me and tried one more time. The charm was gone. The performance was gone. What was left was just the raw negotiation of a man who had run out of moves. "Come on," he said quietly. "We can settle this. I will cut you a check. I will sign over a percentage. We do not have to do this." "We already did this," I said. "You did it when you changed the locks on the apartment and threw my things into the hallway. You did it when you told your family I was emotionally unstable. You did it when you told every investor and vendor in this building that this restaurant was built on your vision and your capital." He said nothing. "I have 49% of this business," I said, "and I want every dollar of my $480,000 returned, with interest, pursuant to the breach clause in the operating agreement. My attorneys have already filed the civil claim. You will receive the discovery schedule by end of week." I latched my bag and turned toward the door. Behind me, I heard the woman in the ivory slip dress finally speak. She had been quiet for the entire confrontation, which I gave her some credit for. But now her voice came across the room, sharp and disbelieving. "You told me this was your business," she said. "You told me you built this from scratch. You told me she signed away her interest when you separated." I did not turn around. I did not need to. "You told me we were going to live off this restaurant," she continued, and her voice was climbing now, no longer quiet, no longer composed. "You told me you were worth $2 million. You told me by the end of this year, we would be looking at properties in the Hamptons." She paused. Are you actually broke? Is any of what you told me real? I pushed open the heavy front door of the restaurant and walked out into the cold Manhattan night. Behind me, I heard his voice rising, trying to explain, trying to spin the story one more time for an audience of one. I did not hear what he said. I did not need to. The street outside was cold and quiet. Yellow cab lights moved past at the end of the block. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the sharp November air, and felt the particular stillness that comes not from peace exactly, but from the end of a very long, very patient wait. 4 months later, I was sitting at a conference table on the 14th floor of a civil courthouse in Lower Manhattan, wearing a wool blazer that I had bought for the occasion and had worn to every single hearing since. Across the table, my husband looked like a version of himself that had been left in the rain. The custom suit was gone. He was in something off the rack that did not quite fit across the shoulders. He had lost weight. His eyes had the particular exhausted quality of someone who has been arguing with lawyers and creditors and landlords for the better part of a season and has not won a single one of those arguments. His attorney cleared his throat and addressed the mediator. My client is prepared to acknowledge the breach claims in the operating agreement and settle the capital restitution demand. However, given that the restaurant has generated no operational revenue since the injunction was placed on the liquor license, my client has no liquid assets to satisfy a lump sum payment. We are requesting a structured settlement arrangement. My attorney opened her binder. We have no objection to a structured settlement, she said pleasantly. However, we require that the structure include a court-supervised wage assignment. Given that my client's previous experience with this respondent involves an unauthorized financial transfer and a falsified amendment to a legal document, we do not rely on good faith alone. The mediator looked at my husband's attorney. Is your client employed? He is currently consulting for a residential design firm in New Jersey, the attorney said carefully. The mediator made a note. Then a wage assignment is entirely appropriate. He looked at both sides of the table. Given the documented breach, the capital restitution figure of $480,000, plus the contractual interest penalty, the respondent's obligation comes to a total of $562,400 to be repaid through a monthly wage assignment until the principal and interest are cleared in full. My husband made a sound that was not quite a word. You cannot take that from my paycheck every month, he said. I will barely have enough to cover rent. The mediator looked at him over his glasses with the specific patience of a man who had heard this exact sentence from 100 different people in 100 different contexts. You should have considered that before you breached a legal agreement with your co-managing member, he said. That is precisely the purpose of the contractual penalty clause. Both parties signed it. My husband looked across the table at me. I met his eyes. I did not look away, but I did not perform anything for him either. No triumph, no sympathy, just the clear and steady look of a woman who had read every document, kept every receipt, and built an airtight case out of the exact same arrogance he had used to dismiss her. He looked away first. The mediator signed the order. My attorney slid her copies into her binder with the efficient satisfaction of someone closing a well-prepared case. I stood, gathered my bag, and shook my attorney's hand. In the hallway outside the conference room, I stood by the window for a moment and watched the street below. The city moved the way it always does, indifferent and continuous. Yellow lights and gray coats, and the low, steady thrum of 10 million people living their complicated lives. Somewhere in New Jersey, my soon-to-be ex-husband was going to drive to a design firm every morning and spend his days doing work he considered beneath him. And on the 1st and 15th of every month, a legally mandated portion of that paycheck was going to be automatically transferred to my account. He had tried to build an empire on my foundation without putting my name on the door. So I took back the foundation. Almost exactly 1 year after that November opening night, I stood in the same dining room where he had raised a glass of Barolo and toasted a future that was never actually his to claim. It looked nothing like it did then. The amber pendant lights were still there. I had kept those because they were genuinely beautiful, and I refused to let his poor decisions ruin good design. But the rest of the space had been entirely reimagined. The private dining room he had planned for high-ticket clients was now a community meeting space with flexible seating and a small stage. available free of charge to local nonprofits and neighborhood groups twice a week. The marble bar, which had always felt more like a status display than a welcoming surface, had been reconfigured into an open counter facing into the kitchen because I wanted people to be able to see where their food came from. The restaurant was still a restaurant, but it was a different kind of place now. We did a prix-fixe on weekends and an affordable rotating menu on weeknights. We partnered with a local culinary school and offered 2 paid apprenticeships per quarter to students who could not afford unpaid internships. The food critic who had spoken up at the opening, Marcus Webb from New York Eats, had written a long and generous review of our relaunch 4 months earlier. He called it one of the most genuinely community-driven dining concepts to open in Manhattan in the past decade. He did not mention my husband at all. My general manager caught my eye from across the room and held up the weekend reservation sheet with a satisfied expression. Fully booked through the end of the month. I nodded and walked toward the back office, stopping briefly by the pass to check in with our head chef, a woman in her early 40s who had spent 12 years working for other people's restaurants and was ready to run her own kitchen. In the office, I sat at my desk and opened my banking app. Right there at the top of the recent transactions was a direct deposit. The same number, the same originating account, the same date it always came. Every month, clean and automatic and entirely legally compelled. I thought about the night I had found out about the opening through an Instagram post. The particular silence of sitting in an empty apartment with your phone in your hand, understanding all at once how long someone has been lying to you and how neatly they had organized that lie. I thought about the 6 weeks of absolute stillness that followed the meetings with attorneys, the forensic accountant, the long, careful review of every document I had ever signed, every transfer I had ever authorized, every clause in every agreement that I had read at the time and then quietly memorized. He had counted on me not reading carefully. He had counted on love making me careless and careless making me manageable. I locked my phone and set it on the desk and looked out the small window that faced the side alley and the thin strip of sky visible between the buildings. What I felt was not quite happiness and not quite relief. It was something cleaner and more structural than either of those, the feeling of a foundation that had been tested completely and had held. His mother, I heard later through mutual acquaintance, had retained her own attorney and was pursuing a separate civil claim against her son over the renovation loan. The relationship between them had not recovered. She had moved to a smaller place in Connecticut and removed herself entirely from his life, which, given her previous devotion to him, struck everyone who knew them as the sharpest possible measure of how completely he had destroyed her trust. The woman in the ivory slip dress had left the night of the opening and had not come back. Whatever version of him she had believed in had not survived the confrontation in the dining room. I bore her no particular ill will. She had made choices, so had he. The difference between them was that she had cut her losses quickly, which was at least strategically sensible, and walked away from a burning building before it fell on her. I almost respected it. As for my husband, I stopped calling him that in my own mind sometime around the 3rd mediation session. He was a person I had once loved who had made a series of choices that compounded into irreversible damage, and he was now a line item on a financial schedule. He existed in my life the way a recurring bill exists, acknowledged, processed, and not thought about further. I know there are people who look at a story like this and see only the legal machinery of it, the motions and the filings and the asset schedules, and miss the part that actually matters. The part that matters is the 6 weeks between finding out and acting. The part that matters is what I did in those 6 weeks instead of screaming, instead of calling his family, instead of showing up at his door and demanding explanations. I read documents, I made calls. I built a case so solid and so precisely constructed that by the time I walked through that restaurant door on the night of his grand opening, there was no version of events in which I did not win. The lesson is not that money is more important than love. The lesson is that love does not protect you from people who have decided to use you. And the only thing that actually protects you in those circumstances is preparation, documentation, and the willingness to understand exactly what you signed and what it means. I trusted him with my heart, and I trusted him with my inheritance. And I lost the first one, which hurt, and I protected the second one, which I refused to apologize for. He wanted to build something that would outlast our marriage and carry his name. What he built instead carries mine. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs the reminder that your value does not decrease because someone chose not to see it, and that the most powerful thing you can do with betrayal is refuse to let it make you careless. Know your contracts, know your rights, know your worth, and make sure you have the paperwork to back it up.